Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the story that is a continuation of yesterday's Re-Tifos. If you haven't listened to it, it is on the channel. Go head over there. I'll have a link down in the description. Anyways, on to Part 2. Few and Far Between, Part 2, written by no good ID names. The market square was deserted under the merciless heat of noon. The shoddy mud bricks lining the square had begun to crack. The very air danced and shimmered. On days like this, not so long ago, not even the slaves would be sent out. High forms and work forms and war forms alike would retreat to the darkest crevices they could find, and sleep until late afternoon when the heat was tolerable. Even now the revolutionaries dozed in the depths of reclaimed houses, their stained knives forgotten under the terrible equalizer of the summer sun. And yet, in a square scoured of civilians, a figure cautiously emerged. No Brendican formed this, but a brown, bare mammalian in slave's robes, balanced precariously on two spindly legs. Tall as a war form, but any war form would laugh at the comparison. How skinny it is, they would say, and no plates. The lowest warrior could break this alien like a twig. But then they would see the eyes. They were not the wide-set, multifaceted eyes of a Brendican. These eyes were forward-set, with rounded pupils. They moved unceasingly, flitting across the empty market, analyzing, evaluating. They ran over a knife stuck fast in a chopping block, a rack of shoddy jewelry, a forgotten squash rotting in the sun. Each innocuous item was pinned, examined, and discarded in turn by the piercing focus of the predator's eyes. When the square had been swept to its satisfaction, the creature twisted its mouth and gave a sharp whistle. A small highborn scampered out from some hidden alleyway. The moody horns atop its head were knotted into fear and caution, but it ran to the alien without hesitation. Together they ducked into a narrow passage and were gone. Squishy paused upon the warehouse door with the squealing protest of a dozen years of rust and grime. The room beyond was piled high with what looked like baskets, twisted into nefarious forms by the gloom. "This should suffice for the time being," he said. He swung his bag to the ground. It clinked with scavenged food and tins and the simple tools. He began to dig into the dusty buckets. In no time, all there was a small wicker burrow, almost entirely hidden from prying eyes. "Be quick now, Opal," he said. Opal scurried into the crevice and gave a small sneeze. Squishy smiled for what seemed like the first time since the world had upended. "It is best to get your sneezes out now, Opal," he said. "You may need your silence later." He reached a hand into the burrow and laid a hand on the child's tangled crests. It seemed to ease a bit at his touch. "You'll be all right while I'm gone?" "Yes, teacher," Opal said. Once, not so long ago, the dark would have frightened him, but he had seen the horrors people could commit in broad daylight. Now the dark was a welcome respite. From his face, it seemed that Squishy could see his ward's thoughts process. He sighed. "Very good, Opal," he said. He straightened and turned to the door. "It is time to see who in the city still possesses a soul." It was another Squishy's uncanny talents. He could enter a house of a complete stranger and, within minutes of idle conversation, know if they were trustworthy. If they were not, he would politely excuse himself, return to Opal, and hunker down for another night of cramped discomfort. But if they were, after another half hour or so of cautious probing, he would bring Opal to them. Their reactions were always different. One, an old work-form matron, had embraced him and wept as if he were her own child. Another, a gruff war-form blacksmith, studiously ignored the high form, refusing to acknowledge his existence. Her work-form accountant had thrown books and pens at Squishy, shouting to get out, to take his little monster with him, that there would be death of him and his family. But in the end, all had given them sanctuary. They never stayed at one home for more than one night, safer for everyone involved. In the cool gloom, Opal methodically laid out his belongings from his little bag. Little more than a week ago, he had owned 1,000 toys, slept on sheets of maltrodden silk, ate meals cooked by the finest chef in the district. Now he took stock, a rough blanket, a rusted pocket knife, a half-dead flash lamp he knew better than to use. As he looked at them, he felt a hollowness inside of him. He could feel it ache, not for his things, his toys, his bed, his food, not for his mother, who was certainly dead. He had locked the thought of her deep, deep away in a place he dared not touch. No, the absence, he felt, the memory that rose and made his eyes smart, was of days not filled with fear, spent in a small, neat room with a blackboard and a writing desk. "Teacher," Opal said, "what would you do if you were free?" It was raining, one of the occasional monsoons that would strike with a fury and rain for weeks on end. Even in the depths of his family tower, he could hear the drumming, faint but steady. The steady scratch of chalk on the blackboard paused. "I believe, Opal," Squishy said, "that I would take a very long vacation." "Where would you go?" "I would take a ship back to the Terran territories if I could," the tutor said. "I've built what life I can here, but it would be good to be among humans once more." "But you would come back?" Opal asked, trying to keep an anxious note out of his voice. Squishy smiled. "Oh, of course, Opal," he said. "I have my reputation to think of. What would people be thinking if the next tutor to come along filled your head with nonsense of all sorts?" Opal relaxed and tried to comb the worry from his crest. "Of course," Squishy added, "I would have to begin charging for my lessons." He paused thoughtfully. "And I believe there would be a considerable amount of back pay." Opal woke at the sudden creak of the door. With a practiced slowness, he pulled the basket over his hiding place. Trembling, he peered out towards the dark hallway. A shape grew, coalescing into Squishy's familiar figure. The tutor was breathing heavily, and bled his strange red blood from a gash on his forehead. There was blood speckled on his sleeves as well, but it was not his own. "Opal!" he called. Opal shoved the basket aside. "Teacher, what happened?" Squishy seemed not to hear the question. "Pack your things quickly," he said. "We must be leaving in haste." He began plucking his belongings from the ground and stuffing them into his bag. Opal was bewildered. But what happened?" "Now is not the time for questions, Opal," the tutor snapped. "We have little enough of it to waste." Opal screwed up his eyes. "Tell me," he said. It was not quite a shout. Squishy stopped packing. He looked piercingly at Opal. "Opal," he said, "do you understand that all I've done, all that I now do, is for your protection? That I'd go to these places and secure your safety in this unsafe time?" "Yes," Opal said. "And do you understand that should many learn that there is a human traveling with a highborn child, that your safety would be compromised? And that they would seek out every hiding place until we were found, and I would no longer be able to protect you?" "Yes," Opal said. "And do you understand," Squishy said, "that should I make an error, and someone who cannot be trusted realizes my secret, and that they would alert everyone they could find, and that for your protection, I'd be forced to take steps to ensure that the secret would not spread? Do you understand this?" "Yes," Opal said. It came out as a whisper. Squishy straightened. "Then, please, Opal, do not be asking me what has happened." He resumed packing. After a moment, so did Opal. Traveling by night was more dangerous than by noon. Even the smallest hours of the morning, small gangs of workforms wandered the city streets, clutching knives, clubs, and torches. They patrolled with less fervor than in the early bloodshed, but even now, over a week since it began, they still found the occasional highform that had survived the initial massacre. The pair's flight was measured in starts and stops, long, intense periods of hiding in shadows, punctuated by mad, frantic rushes before the next patrol could round the corner. They did not enjoy the luxury of speech. Run was a tug forward, hide was a tug downwards. For one long, agonizing moment, a work-form gang paused right beside their hiding place to drink and talk. Crouched within a patch of foliage, Opal could have reached out and snatched the workform's weapon from his belt. But in time, they moved along, and then there was another dash to the next piece of cover. "I believe that we have but one day's journey further, Opal," Squishy said, "before we reach the spaceport." They were hiding in a junkyard, tucked away inside a rusted-out vehicle. He had swept the broken glass from punched-out windows and cleared a spot to lay their blanket over jagged tears in the floor. Through the gash in the roof, Opal could see the stars. "What happens then?" Opal asked. "Then we must be rolling the dice," said Squishy. "If we can get onto an alien craft, I can plead our case to its captain and gain passage away from the Brendican rings. If we cannot, we must settle for a local ship. The crew would undoubtedly be unwilling to aid our endeavor. However, we would likely be able to stow away in a cargo hold. It would be more difficult, but it is an option. This is the step most full of risk, Opal, but once it is completed, we will be quite close to safety." Opal mustered up the courage to ask his next question. "And what if they find us?" he asked. "What if the captain won't take us? What if they want to sell us out to the mobs?" In the dark, he could sense his tutor weighing his words carefully. "Then I'll do what I must," he finally said. They lay there in silence until Opal could hear Squishy's breath become slow and soft. Then, when he was sure the human was asleep, he slowly rose. With as little noise as he could, the child climbed out of their hiding place and made his way into the night, alone. It was all pieced together quite neatly in his mind. The mobs were looking for high forms, not for humans. If a human was found harboring a high form, both would certainly be killed, but a human alone, they would be free to go as they pleased. He could not have gotten this far without Squishy, of course, but now that the end was in sight and Opal knew what to do, there was no point in endangering him any more, not when the risk was so high. Perhaps Squishy could protect him, but Opal was not sure if he wanted that anymore, not when he could see time and again how much it cost his teacher to do so. When Squishy was a slave, Opal had not freed him. He had lacked the wisdom and the will to do so. But here and now, Opal saw that he could at least free his tutor from responsibility, from danger, from suspicion and exile, from violence inflicted and received. It was quite a grown-up decision, he felt. He had come to this part of the city before, when he was younger. Mother and fourth father had brought him to greet some relative or another coming into the spaceport. He had been very young, but even now he could remember the way. What he had not counted on was wandering patrols that drove him down unfamiliar alleys and strange streets. Every frantic detour to escape approaching tortures took him further from memory. In no time at all, he was hopelessly lost. Opal stopped in a small secluded plaza off the main streets to gather his bearings. That way ran east and west, and he'd gone left to take it, and right before that, and he was sure the street before that had been familiar, so it must be. Too late. He noticed the glow of torches growing behind him and the tread of careful feet. It wasn't until he heard the faint sound of steel clearing leather that his mind managed to piece together all the clues into a horrifying conclusion. And then there was nothing to do but turn. There were 8 of them, all work forms, all armed. Some held long knives, some short stick clubs. In the back, Opal could see one held a huge industrial nail gun in a stocky fist. Their leader, closest to him, had one broken horn on his crest that seemed to give him a permanent sneer. He had stripped his slave's robes to bare to waist and wore Highform's blood-stained clan necklace. In his upper right hand, he held a machete. "Are you all alone, little master?" he asked. His voice was surprisingly even-toned. Opal had expected some sort of guttural growl, but the question was as genial as if they spoke in a crowded market. "Are your parents here?" Opal became painfully aware of how neatly he was trapped. His back was pressed against an iron gate. High walls flanked him on either side. His head twitched back and forth, searching for an escape. "I asked you a question, little master," Brokenhorn said. His voice took on a hint of an edge. "It would be impolite to not answer." Opal managed to shake his head wordlessly. The leader looked back at the gang and gestured with his long machete. "Keep him alive," he said. "He may be lying." He turned back to the child. "But they'll come when they hear him scream." They advanced, slowly. They were in no hurry. They knew that he was trapped. Opal looked at their faces, trying to find some ounce of mercy or pity. He found none. There was something unspeakably dispassionate about their expressions, as if they were performing a mindless chore. They would slaughter him as casually as they would livestock. No, not like livestock, like vermin. Opal screwed his eyes shut as they closed in. He'd been a fool to think that he could survive on his own. He prayed for something, anything. "Excuse me, gentlemen, if I may please be having your attention." The mob paused, struggling to protest the unexpected voice. Then they turned. Behind them stood Squishy, with one arm. He held one workform struggling helplessly in a complex grip. In the other, he held a nail gun. "It is not my preference to cause undue harm," he said, and calmly as if he was discussing the weather. "So I will ask all of you to please leave the child and be on your way." No one seemed inclined to move. Brokenhorn hefted his machete. "What's he to you?" he asked. "I am his tutor," Squishy said, "and he is my ward." The crests fled. "House slave!" the leader snarled. He took a step towards the human, raising his blade. "You traitorous!" The captive workform screamed as Squishy pressed the nail gun to his palm and pulled the trigger, punching an inch-thick spike through the neat meat of his hand. Brokenhorn halted his charge, shocked. Squishy's voice cracked out like a whip. "Gentlemen, with each step I will be forced to cause your friend further distress," he said. "As it stands, with the proper medical attention, his hand may be restored to full working order in time." He pressed the nail gun to the sobbing workform's wrist. "Now, once more," he said, "I am asking you to leave the child and be on your way." Broken Horn looked back towards Opal. Opal could see him thinking. Just 3 steps, and he would have the hostage of his own. He tensed for a moment, and ka-chink! The sound came with a crack and shattered chitin and bone as the next bolt obliterated the workform's wrist. Broken Horn whirled back around. "Do not be looking away from me, please," Squishy snapped. "You understand that I must treat such things as a threat and respond accordingly." He hefted his captive, who had fainted dead away. "I'm afraid this hand is now permanently maimed. However, he still possesses 3 working hands with which to ply his trade." His expression darkened. "That may change." Opal marveled at the control Squishy held over the mob. By all rights, they should have swarmed the strange alien and torn him apart, and if he had killed one of their own, they would have. But they were unprepared for this measured, methodical cruelty. Every time they threatened to come together, they were shocked back into hesitation. It was a delicate balance, and it could not hold forever. But for now, he kept them paralyzed in indecision. "Opal," he said, "to me, please, with haste." Opal scurried between the workforms. He could feel the frustration and bewilderment boiling off of them. One dared to glance down at him, tensed his knife. Ka-chink! "That is an other left-hand ruin," Squishy said. "Binding work will now be quite difficult for him. I do not believe he was right-handed." Opal made it the rest of the way without issue. When Opal was by his side, Squishy heaved an unconscious captive to the ground. "Now, if you would, please take him and go," he said. "He is badly in need of medical care." Broken Horn spared not a glance at the body. Slowly he raised his machete to point at the tutor. "Now you have nothing. We are 7, and you are 1. Squishy matched his stare. "It is true that fighting all of you at once would be quite difficult, yes," he said. "I'm afraid it would be necessary to escalate immediately to lethal force. Understand that this is not what I wish." He leveled the nail gun at Broken Horn. "Gentlemen," he said, 9 days ago I killed a blooded warform in single combat." His voice turned cold. "Do not test me on this." There was a long, terrible pause. Finally, Broken Horn gestured with his blade. "Get him to the hospital," he said. "This one's not worth our time." 2 of the workforms came forward nervously and grabbed their comrade, dragging him carefully by his arms that had not yet been ruined. Slowly, with many glances back, they filed out of the plaza. Bringing up the tail was Broken Horn. He stared for one long, inscrutable moment at the human in the high form, before turning at last into the dark. The tension broke. Opal spun to embrace Squishy, just as he dropped the nail gun and lifted the child into his arms. "Teacher," Opal sobbed. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" "Hush now, Opal," said Squishy. He pressed his forehead against the student's crest. "I know why you ran, and if our circumstances were reversed, I would not say that I would not have done the same. But understand, Opal," he said, "that to lose you now would destroy me as thoroughly as any blade or bullet. I am responsible for your well-being. You must be responsible for mine. May this be our agreement?" Choked up, Opal could only nod. Squishy lowered to the ground. "Good," he said. "Let us be leaving at speed. Now a matter of finding the right ship." It was high noon, even in their dark hiding place. Looking out over the deserted spaceport, the air felt thick and choking from the heat. Through the shimmering dance of heat haze, they could see hundreds of starships nestled together like penned birds. The vast majority were Brendican, graceful, swooping vessels with wings folded neatly into themselves to save room. Dotted here and there, though, were a variety of others. Opal recognized some, a Vuth trader, bulging with cargo holds, a Minderath Burke, all delicate spires and cables, even an Illilan cruiser, an arrowhead bristling with cannons. All of the tension seemed to flood out of his teacher. "Do you see that ship, Opal?" he said, pointing. Snug between 2 graceful Brindican vessels was a bulky, squat alien shuttle he did not know. Where its neighbors were smooth and unblemished, this craft was pitted and scarred. Whatever paint had once been smeared across it had long since been scorched away by years of repeated re-entry. It almost seemed to hunch between the prettier ships. "Were we to find a Mistosi ship," Squishy said, "I would have been glad. The Mistosi are a cautious race, but they are great lovers of stories, and I would have more than enough to keep them entertained for our trip. Were we to find a more Turritan ship, I would have been content, he said. My Pateri is rather rusty, but they are a very physical race. They run fighting pits in their ships and treat their fighters well, and I've encountered enough Pateri to have the measure of them. Were we to find an Ulbrak ship, he said, I would have managed. They take on no passengers for free and hold no truck for stowaways, but they are, to a man, keen on gambling and have many skills. An hour at their shoddy table, and I'd like to be able to buy passage outright. But never in our terrible flight did I expect to find a ship such as the one before us now. He smiled. That, Opal, is a human ship. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.